Welcome. Welcome to Disrupting with Purpose. Thanks for joining in. If you've been with us before, you're familiar with our format, but for all of the newbies, Disrupting with Purpose is basically a virtual dialogue that centers young people and amplifies their perspectives concerning the issues that they face. And even more specifically, it's focusing on engaging young people who have lived experience with the topics of discussion. So with that said, we have a dynamic group of panelists, and as always, we're expecting an insightful dialogue. Today's topic is unequal housing opportunity, youth perspectives on home ownership. And this topic was actually born out of discussions and focus groups with young people around inequities that serve as barriers to developing and sustaining community wealth in communities of color. And this has directly led to some of the work around housing instability and wealth building that Youth Prize does. So the young adults who are on today's panel are actually a part of Youth Prize's Youth Cooperative Homeownership Initiative, which offers a solution to disrupting some of those inequities. And it seeks to create opportunities for homeownership and building wealth, particularly for young people of color. So these young people are actually leading us in designing the cooperative and helping us imagine what a young adult focused cooperative should look like. So we're looking forward to hearing from them. And so thanks again for joining in. Leading us through today's discussion is the absolute best moderator in the Twin Cities and longtime friend of Youth Prize, Lissa Jones-Lofgren.
Lynn, you are a joy every time I see you. And thank you, Youth Prize, for having me back as your MC and moderator. I am so excited for the voices to shine. So let's get right to it. Our framer for today is none other than Angela Gravely Smith. I am so excited you are here, Angela, to provide some framing for today's conversation. I send the mic your way.
Thank you, Lissa. And thank you, Youth Prize, for having me join today's discussion. I'm really glad to be here on behalf of Living Cities and pleased to set the context for today's conversation. Additionally, I am a mom of two young adults who are about to step into the world, and I look at them and support them with awe and excitement and hope. And that's how I think of all young people. So really, really glad to be here. So I want to tell you a little bit about Living Cities and then talk about, why homeownership and get us kicked off here. So Living Cities supports thoughtful conversations like this that bring together stakeholders and champions who care deeply about equitable opportunities for under-resourced youth. Like I said, particularly excited about the conversation today, and really because we're having it with the cohort members of the Youth Prize Cooperative Homeownership Initiative, as Youth Prize is a participant in the Living Cities Closing the Gaps cohort, where we are a direct supporter of the initiative. So it's an honor to really be engaged with you all and hear directly from you. So briefly, who and what is Living Cities? So we are a collaborative of prominent philanthropic foundations and financial institutions supporting cities to close the racial income and wealth gaps in the country. We do this through investments and engagement with local governments to support the intentionality of racial equity in programs, policies, and practices. We have a particular focus on strategically addressing systemic racial inequities to build wealth among BIPOC communities through entrepreneurship, homeownership, and access to capital. Our North Star, an America where all people are economically secure, building wealth, and living abundant, dignified, and connected lives. I invite you to learn more about Living Cities and the Closing the Gaps Network to help create a more equitable society. So why concern ourselves with homeownership? Research shows that over time, homeownership is a chief means to help people create wealth and economic stability. I'll say it again, create wealth and economic stability. However, the pursuit of homeownership by people of color in the United States has been interrupted, made difficult, devalued, and flat out taken away, creating stark disparity compared to homeownership by white counterparts. Research recently produced by institutions such as the Urban Institute and Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies report racial disparities in homeownership between households of people of color and those of white households. Their research report, the landscape scan of homeownership for households of color, the Urban Institute reports the following. Just a few data points for you all. The white homeownership rate is 72%, which is 30 percentage points higher than that of Black homeownership rate at 42%. 24% percentages higher than the Hispanic homeownership rate at 48%. 19 percentages points higher than the Native homeownership rate at 53%, and 12 percentage points higher than the Asian homeownership rate at 60%. And although the reasons behind the racial disparities vary, research shows that they are often attributable to differences in households' access to financial resources and information, and persistent racial discrimination. As stated in the description for this conversation, longstanding and intentional practices of blocking access for certain populations have tangible consequences for young people's opportunities to build wealth and prosper. So let's listen in closely to the lived experiences and aspirations of these young people toward achieving a better life through the pursuit of homeownership. Their experiences will offer us the opportunity of understanding, connection to our humanity, and to hope. We may also gain clarity around the barriers and potential direction toward equitable solutions. Thanks.
Thank you, Angela, for that important grounding and context. I'm very, very glad you were here and delighted to hear from you in a few more minutes. Before we get started, I just want people to be familiar with what we're going to be talking about in sort of the format that Lynn advised us would be what we'd be using. The young people and the adult respondents are going to respond to the racial gap in financial literacy. And then in our second portion, we will focus on systemic barriers in home ownership, again, delving into the lived experience of our panelists. I'm very excited at this time to welcome our panelists to join me in conversation to talk about the racial gap in financial literacy. Our panelists include Emmett Dysart, Marcella Salvin Morfin, Kadeem Washington, and Summer View. Welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi,
Thank you.
welcome, Kadeem.
Hi.
Hi, Marcella, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having us again.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm delighted you're here. Hi, Summer.
Hi.
All right. Shall we get started, team?
Yep.
All right. Anybody can respond. To begin, our first question, do you recall having family conversations about money and wealth? Conversations that included debt, credit cards, or owning a home? And if so, what did those conversations include? What were you taught?
Yeah, I could start. We could
Thank you.
bounce around with each other. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt nobody, but if I'm speaking from my personal experience, I do recall having conversations about money growing up. Some of those conversations were helpful conversations. Some of those conversations would be stressful conversations. I feel like I didn't fully grasp financial literacy or start to get into it until I started working at about 14, to where I had to manage my own money and figure out how that worked. And then I also, probably within the last 2 years, have learned a little bit more through a bunch of different books. So it's definitely been a process, but growing up, I would say those conversations had like a range of different, I guess, like feelings to them.
I can back that. So just having like full transparency, I am the firstborn in my family in the US. So growing up with undocumented parents, I think from their end, there was a lot of fear, even trying to figure out how many worked and everything here. So they didn't really reach out. They didn't know the resources or have the language to even figure that out. And so it definitely was up to me as I got older. And I wouldn't say until I got my first credit card, I think I was 19, where they kind of were like, okay, hold on a minute, like maybe we should kind of talk about it a little bit. But yeah, there wasn't really much growing up, just because I think there wasn't a lot of understanding on their part.
Yeah, and I can actually relate to that a lot. My family also immigrated to the country, and so to be completely honest, I actually didn't have a lot of these conversations growing up, and now that I'm older, I don't know if that's because my parents were like not that knowledgeable in this information. And like similarly to what Marcella is saying, is, we had to navigate this new country on our own in a country where they also speak a different language too. So there were multiple barriers that our family and like people from similar communities have to overcome as well.
Piggyback
Thank
off of all of that, my family, my household I grew up in, we were living check to check, and my parents did a decent job at trying to keep that away from my sisters and I. We relied on different things like food shelves and the prop shop, like a clothing resource. We have a large family, so hand-me-downs were like huge when it came to re-upping for the next school year. Whenever money came into the conversation, we were always told like, "Don't worry about it, you're a kid." They were very consistent with like trying to let us be kids, even though that we knew like we were, my sisters and I were dealing with issues that our neighbors weren't dealing with. So when it came to financial literacy, it's safe to say that like my parents weren't experts in that area, nor were they experts in teaching us what we needed to do to obtain wealth. And so because of that, we weren't given advice um, to create wealth. And um, I remember this one time, like my little sister received like a credit card in the mail, and like my dad just got like so angry, not at my sister, but at the credit card companies for targeting us, right? And I know that like neighbors of mine, they were authorized users on their parents' credit cards, and so like we always had different conversations about like, well, why is it that way for someone right across the street? But we can't start building our credit or anything like that. And part of that was because they were just ignorant. It's safe to say, and I don't say that like in a belittling way, but it's just like facts. And so because of that, it took me a while to kind of come around and learn what um, credit scores work, how the system works, and just equipping myself with the literacy I need to prosper.
Thank you. I hear it's difficult to teach somebody something you don't know. And coming to a strange place with strange people who are speaking a strange language, how, if you don't understand, how could you teach? So we say these things with great respect and deference to the people who did the best they could. And I appreciate so much that you four are sharing these experiences. Let's pivot just a little bit. Considering the things you learn about financial literacy and home ownership as a cohort member of the Youth Cooperative Homeownership Initiative, does it give you a sense of responsibility to share what you've learned with your family and perhaps friends and other people in your network? Anybody
It
can jump in.
definitely does, yeah. I mean, obviously, we want our families to, learn and do all the things that they didn't have or they didn't know before. So, definitely feel responsibility, and also just wanting to share even with like friends and family friends, because there are a lot of people that really just don't know these things, and there aren't many resources. And I mean, people are so busy working 2, 3 jobs, and so it's kind of hard to, even when there is information or there are resources, it's kind of, difficult to find the time to learn. So, being able to be in a place where we're learning all of this, and it's such a blessing, and, it's more of a blessing to be able to share it with everyone, especially, younger nieces, nephews, siblings, and everything, so that they don't have to go through all of the things that we have to go through. So it definitely feels really good, but it is, it's nice to be able to share that.
Yeah, and I could second that because I come from a large family as well. I'm the middle of 6, and just being in that place and having younger siblings and seeing them now at the age of where I was when I first started working, just understanding that like you're making money now, but you can be stacking that money up. You can take that money and start investing that money already to where by the time that you are of adult age and you do look to move out, you kind of already have that foundation, that security. And also it's like our parents, at least my parents I can speak to, having that many siblings, they were always working. So I feel like having that financial freedom or that financial literacy kind of just gives people more freedom. You don't have to worry about when is rent going to be due, who's going to pay that, or where's your next meal coming from, those different things. So I feel like it definitely is our responsibility to share that, because like it was said earlier, if they don't know these things, how can they teach these things? So I feel like it is the responsibility of us as we're learning those things to kind of share those things and put everybody in a position of wealth building to where we can share that wealth and kind of foster a community that is collaborative and works really well together. And we don't have to worry about, family members getting sick and not being able to afford a hospital bill, because we have that supply of income, not just from one person, but from, like I said, a community. And I feel like that's really important.
To build off of that, a term that was recently introduced to me was cooperative economics. And that idea is profound, just to combine your income with your family's income or other community members, and to build off of that. That's something that I think goes hand in hand with this question about it being our responsibility to share that knowledge. There's only so far you can go sometimes, because some people are, in their way. So you don't want to lead a horse to water that's going to refuse to drink it. So it really just depends. Like, you can put the information out, but if it's not received, just having the patience for people to come around as well is important, so that we're not stressing ourselves out to just keep beating a dead horse, for lack of better terms.
Yeah, I agree with everybody, and I don't want to reiterate anything because I very much agree and I'm on the same page. But my last point that I would want to make is, by not speaking up and not advocating for a collective good, you are being complicit to these current systems that we're currently living in that continue to perpetuate inequality and further divide and cause separation between communities. So it's definitely important to have these conversations, because in order to truly see and create change, it starts with engaging and having conversations with your community, your friends, your family. So yes, I definitely feel that.
And if I
Brilliant.
could just add to that, sorry. I think, yeah, you kind of brought up an important point. I think it's even important to have these conversations, even with people who do know, who are on the other side kind of that privilege. So
Mhm.
that's definitely like, I don't personally get uncomfortable talking about these things, but I know a lot of people when they're on the other side can get uncomfortable, but that's so important to have these conversations again, because some people really, you would expect that they know better, but some people maybe don't. And so again, you don't want to be perpetuating these kind of systems again. So just even talking about people who know about it already, just to kind of see what different perspectives are on it too is really important.
Excellent perspectives, everyone. I also am very interested in the way that culture is often transferred unconsciously. Ujamaa is a Kwanzaa principle, cooperative economics, right? We do better because we cooperate together, so everybody gets up together and can stay up together. That's excellent. That's excellent. Thank you, team. So what role, if any, do you think K through 12 schools have in teaching financial literacy? Do they have a responsibility? What should they be teaching? What do you think?
And I hope I'm not trying to like hog up all the time or like keep going first, but feel free to hop in if y'all want. But this is a big one for me personally. I feel like public school at least sets people up to work 9 to 5 jobs, where there's nothing wrong with that. You gotta get how you live. If you need to eat, you need food on the table, that's how you do it, cool. But I don't feel like public school really sets us up in a way that we are learning financial literacy. I remember I didn't even have an economics class until probably like 10th grade. And I don't remember anything from that class, really. But I remember when I was younger, I did go to a charter school, and there were like places in St. Paul, like Biztown, that did teach you how to kind of operate within like the financial system. But for the most part, you don't really get a lot of that versus like private schools. They'll teach you that stuff at a young age, or people who do come from privileged backgrounds. their parents are already teaching them those sort of things. They already have college funds and those different things. And it's not like to fault them per se, but I feel like if that was something that was integrated into the school system, it would definitely have a big benefit because kids spend majority of their time in school. Like where adults go to work, kids go to school. Outside of that, we engage in community. Like some of us might play sports, some of us might do other things where we're a part of these programs. So if that financial literacy aspect is going to be integrated, I feel like it should be through the school system, through community programming, through places of worship. Some people, you know, are religious and that might be one of the other places they're spending a majority of their time. But I just definitely see like a big lack in the school system when it comes to that.
I will jump in here because I actually went to private school K through 12th grade. And at least where I went, we did not learn any of that. You know, K through 8th grade, it was all one school. And it was definitely not like the type of private school you'd expect. It was a little bit just like Catholic. So it was like, oh, private school. But that, yeah, obviously like that young, the closest thing I ever got to learning about anything is learning how to write a check in 4th grade. But I'm 25. I've written a check maybe twice in my life. And then high school, I did go to, I don't want to like say names or anything, but it was like a really well-known good high school. Never took an economics class, didn't know anything. And I constantly felt way behind from like peers and stuff because I know that they did come from a different background. They came from different, even, you know, middle schools that were, I guess you could say, more advanced. And it was a predominantly white school, so it was, you know, just way different experience. But we didn't learn about any of that because I think it was assumed that a lot of students already got that at home and they had that background, they had that knowledge, but I had none of it. Even college applications, you know, my parents didn't know what a FAFSA was. They didn't know how to fill out college applications or anything like that. And even the counselors were like, wait, do that at home, you know, why are you doing that here? So that was a very different experience. And maybe, you know, other private schools do that, but at least from my experience, we didn't do that because I think it was assumed that we already knew that. So that's just interesting. So
I'd speak to the role schools should play in just educating folks about financial literacy. Um, I I think that schools should be mandated and required from K through 12 to have some kind of financial literacy. I also shared that experience of like learning how to write a check, which was almost a waste of time because obviously they're out of style, but um, also because like at that age when we had learned how to write checks, like nobody was writing a check. That would have been a great thing to learn maybe junior or senior year. Whereas like in elementary, we're just like learning the skill passively to pass time. The legislation that President Johnson had passed called the Economic Opportunity Act um, provided banks and COCs, just like cares of continuum, different and different organizations to match folks' savings accounts. So like there's already things in existence that need to be um, not just funded but expanded. Uh, these kinds of programs that exist that are kind of in silos that a lot of people don't really know about are um, in the shadows for a reason. So shining light on them and bringing awareness to the public school system is something that I think is really important. I had went to an affluent school out in the suburbs, and this particular school was great and all. I had transferred back to a school in the city, and I just remember seeing stark differences in the way that teachers would talk about different financial things. And we wouldn't necessarily have like subjects where they would talk and speak on these things. It was more of something that you had to be keen and observe. I remember just looking at the habits of my friends and peers who are wealthy compared to folks who weren't. And the same goes for the teachers and the staffs and the janitors. Like having a lot of money in your bank account and I'm driving like a really crappy car, like that's you stay down until you come up. And so like these
Thank you.
concepts are like very prevalent, but they're not like specifically taught. And so I think that if schools were to be intentional about teaching these concepts, that you have to kind of be on the really, you really have to be an observer to
get it.
where
Thank you, Emmett. Thank you. Team, we're going to pivot just a minute to some adult respondents. I want to say thank you for the moment to Marcella, Summer, Kadeem, and Emmett. We'll be back with you shortly. You really put what I call a lot of fat on our heads. Thank you so much. At this time, I'd like to invite our adult respondents to come and join me, please. That would be Angela and Khalik, and I'm missing somebody, forgive me. Oh, Benjamin, thank you. Benjamin, Khalik, and Angela, please join me. Thank you. What are your thoughts? What responses might you like to give to the things that you just heard? And either of you could go first, Khalik or Benjamin, and Angela too. Thank you. Welcome, Khalik and Benjamin.
Yeah, hey.
Hi.
I mean, what comes to mind for me is it's just awesome you all are talking about financial literacy, because I think that's the key is communicating and just starting that conversation. Because what I'm hearing, what I also experienced as a kid, is just very few people talk about it. You know, it's not only do we all lack sort of formal classes at school and stuff, but even after that, like it still seems pretty rare that folks really just step out and talk about these difficult things. And I do have to wonder, I mean, maybe it's because people are nervous that they don't know enough. Like you're not a financial advisor, professional type person. And so everyone's kind of hesitant. I'm not sure, but I think it's awesome that you all are just stepping up and just like getting it out there, you know, putting yourself out there and getting ideas on the table, because that's the first step.
Thank you, Benjamin. Khalik?
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, off of Benjamin, there's been some discussions even at the legislature on financial literacy. Actually, recently passed a bill that in 2025, that all ninth grade students actually have to learn financial literacy. So just to echo that is conversations that are being had, but what's always important is to make sure that the youths and the young people, young adults coming up are helping to contribute to those conversations as well, because there's one thing to get a bill passed, but it's another to understand how it's being implemented, so and how it shows up in the community. And just to a lot of your points that you're mentioning, there's different levels of knowing when it comes to financial literacy, and how do you help people that are not just at a middle class level of investments and things of that nature, but how do you work with people where they're at, if they're at the poverty line as well. So we've had conversations actually just this past previous week. We worked with some people who worked with MDE, who worked on that legislation to get youth voice involved on actually create the students to tell their story of what type of financial literacy classes they've had, and if not, what type of ways would they like to learn financial literacy in this day and age. So there's opportunities to not just have this conversation, but to expand on that through more conversations with MDE. So keep you guys engaged on that too, if you're interested.
Hope matters. Thank you, Khalik. I like that. 2025, we need to put it in the ninth grade. Love it. Angela, you're smiling. What's on your mind?
I thought it was wonderful to hear you all talk about a responsibility to share what you're learning with your siblings and other people in your community. And like Benjamin, I had the same experience. We never really talked about a whole bunch of stuff. You know, we observed, but never really talked about it, and certainly didn't have my older brother and sister talking to me about when they first went to work and managing their money and those kinds of things. So I think it's fabulous that you guys see that as your responsibility and are taking the opportunity to be able to share what you're learning. And even when you still have questions, really just having the dialogue and being open to having the dialogue to introduce the ideas to the people that you're engaged with is wonderful.
I love that. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Benjamin, Khalik, and Angela, we'll see you again soon. In the meantime, with our youth panelists, we're going to pivot a bit into the second segment of our conversation, which is focused on systemic barriers to homeownership. In this piece, we'll delve into the systemic hurdles so that we will focus on the youth panelists' take on structural barriers that perpetuate housing inequity. Boy, that was a lot for me to say. Let me say that again. In this case, we're going to talk about barriers to home ownership and get our youth panelists' experience about those things that they've had in their lives. So let's try that again from the top. Welcome back, Marcella and Summer. Welcome back, Emmett and Kadeem. So let's start with the first question, if you don't mind. A lot of focus is placed on the financial literacy gap as one of the main reasons low-income families aren't able to overcome poverty. However, what systemic and other barriers contribute to the racial wealth gap and housing inequality, especially for Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian populations? That's a lot to say in a short amount of time, but what's on your mind?
You speak in my language now. So my background is in environmental design. I've been doing this since, like I said, I started working at 14. I've been doing this since 14, and I've done, dang, that's 10 years of experience. So over the course of the past years, like we've done like community engagement, and you start to learn this like terminology, and you'll also learn that a lot of these different policies are actually legal policies. So you'll start to learn things about like gentrification or displacement or redlining, or people coming in your neighborhood, seeing potential for it. So they'll start to build things in your neighborhood. And now since it is being gentrified, since you do have like amenities in your neighborhood, they'll spike your rent. Now your rent is up and you can't afford to live in a place that you've been living for years. And they have all these amenities coming into your neighborhood. So you're ultimately being pushed out. You get pushed out of your neighborhoods, and basically like that's where the barriers happen. How can I build wealth if I'm put in a position where I am being displaced or I am being moved around? We've seen it with Rondo. We've seen it with 94, 35W. They do it whenever they put up a highway or something. They strategically go through neighborhoods of color. Even when they are flourishing neighborhoods, it doesn't matter. And it's just been a thing that's been happening for years and years and years. And I feel like those are like some of the main causes of that wealth gap, because, you know, we're products of our environment ultimately. So if you're growing up in environments that aren't really fit for you to build or for you to grow, then how can you grow? It's kind of, you know, you're ultimately being oppressed. But those are a few words that you can look into. If y'all haven't heard of them, I'm pretty sure that other people have, but that's my input.
Thank you, Kadeem. I see a lot of head nodding. Who's up, team?
To kind of add to that point, I feel like also the unequal access to resources like healthcare as well. I'm actually currently reading a book right now called Legacy by Uche Blackstock. I don't know if y'all have heard about it. Pretty good book, but I feel like also when you're put into a position, you know, when you live in an environment in which, you know, there's a lot of pollution, or for example, like you were saying, you know, there's a lot of gentrification to a point where you're pushed out of communities that you always lived in which that your mental and physical well-being also is starting to decline, you're going to be in a headspace where, you know, you can't address all these other issues that you're now encountering as well. And so I think it all really ties together in that, you know, these laws are in place to intentionally make it difficult for these individuals to have access to these opportunities. And more so, you're forced to stay in these positions where you are continually being discriminated against and oppressed, like Kadeem was saying.
And even then, just kind of adding on to everything, because 100% like agreed, and all that is so important. And then even just like the access to transportation, you know, trying, like, depending on where you live, the transportation to get to your job, to get to school, even that takes a lot of time away from your day. When you're trying to use, public transport or something that isn't always going to be on time, you can't always rely on that. You miss one bus and boom, you're waiting maybe an hour, for the next one. So even just the access to that transportation, because again, it is not all going to be equitable. And then even just adding, again, just because, how like the undocumented side of experience, just like a big thing, even with trying to buy a house, which I kind of recently went through with my mom, the down payment for buying a house is $50,000, just down payment, just because you don't have papers. So, who has $50,000, when you're like working a job that doesn't pay you a whole lot because you don't have papers. So that's like a big hurdle trying to jump that. And then all the loaning options, again, if you don't have a great credit, or if you don't have papers, or if you don't, haven't even had the chance to build credit because you don't have all the opportunities, and they're just getting kind of taken away from you because of, just how you look or your background or where you come from. So those are very basic things that we just want access to. We need access to, we need to talk about it. We need to make it just, accessible to all. And we don't, like, not everybody has that. And it's kind of crazy because wouldn't they want us to succeed so that we can contribute in every way to the economy? Ultimately we make more, we spend more, we can do more, we're healthier, we're happier, and society as a whole is improved, like it's just better overall. So it's just crazy to me when I just get so frustrated. But anyways, yeah.
I agree with everything everyone has said. And I'd also add that not everyone wants to be homeowners. And part of that reason I feel like is because of the fact that people don't understand the power you have when you do become a homeowner. I know that in the real estate area that, well, even before then, like developers, like whenever you see a development happening for low income housing or Section 42 or Section 8 housing, it's always apartments. And this is a knock at apartments, right? Because when I was a kid, I always looked at apartments as like temporary housing to transition into becoming a homeowner one day. And that was always like the goal, right? There was always something like just a step below, where you want it to be. At least that's how it was framed to me as a child. And so knowing that things like the Rondo being torn down, or 35 being torn down, that's not unique just to Minnesota. That's all around the nation. And so those kinds of barriers to even creating wealth exist. And I believe that there needs to be some kind of legislation that recuperates all the people that got lowballed and had to sell their home. There needs to be something passed that gives folks reparations for all of these systemic things. And if it's not that, lowering the interest rates or erasing them at all, erasing them totally so that people can get in the housing market, and then giving a break to developers to create housing for folks that aren't able to, purchase a house. Like you said, 50K, that's ridiculous just for a down payment. So that's what I'll add.
This is a magnificent conversation, and I think about the work of the Mapping Prejudice Project at the University of Minnesota. If you are able to somehow get $50,000 from a very low-paying job in a country that doesn't have value you, and you somehow could come up with the money, there could be a racial covenant on a house saying you can only sell it to other white people. I mean, so, this is systemic and very, very deep. The next question surrounds, in what ways, what kinds of tools or resources would you want to have access to in order for things to improve around financial literacy for you and your family? Tools, resources, classes, what kinds of things do you envision could help you get closer to solution?
I'm going to start off by just saying cash, right? Make it sweet and simple. When we talk about tools and resources, it's easy to overlook that one because of the fact that it's the obvious reason. Like if there were more opportunities where cash was just freely given out, or if it was just, do X, Y, and Z and here you go, I think that would be a game changer for the nation, for everyone. And obviously, there's been a saying that I've heard before that if all of the money in the world was distributed equally, that it would end up eventually back in the same hands it's in right now. And that's because of the habits. That's because of the literacy. But at the same time, being able to give folks that opportunity to do with what they will with the cash that they have, I think, is important. There's enough wealth on the world that everyone can be a millionaire. Like, it should be a birthright that when you are born, you are a millionaire. And the fact that greed exists and that's not a birthright frustrates my soul. And I think cash is just the simple umbrella answer for that. But I'll let others say their sense as well.
I think programs like these are crucial. You know, even just learning, that's the first thing, because you can't really change much if you don't know what's going on. So even kind of like what Kadeem was saying, like just talking about, you know, I didn't learn about redlining until after high school. So learning about redlining, all just like all the types of like systemic racism and different things that have been happening that obviously you don't learn that in school because they don't want to teach that in school. So that is really important to learn at an early age, as well as obviously even how to save your money, that you should save part of your paycheck. You shouldn't spend all your money. And I think like one of the most important things is learning about banks, that banks don't have your best interests at heart. That's a huge thing because I didn't know that. I was like, oh, it's a bank, you know, they just want my money so they can give me money too. But yeah, I think that's like a major thing, is learning how banks work. And even just different options like credit unions and, you know, like high yield savings account, all of those things that we should know before we even start working, instead of learning it 10 years into, you know, your career or anything. So I think just knowledge is super duper important, and the earlier the better.
Yes, I would agree. I think just in general, we should have free, accessible resources as opposed to, like, for example, you have to pay to speak to like a financial advisor or a financial counselor. And I'm like, I don't have the money for that. So, you know, we need
That's why
to
I'm here.
Exactly, exactly. So we need free, accessible resources in which, you know, like you're saying, we can get this knowledge. And, you know, I think it's important, especially if your demographic is youth and young people, it's important to understand that you also need to be very creative in how you're doing that, because you need to be able to engage with youth and young people. You know, you're not talking to grown adults that already may have this understanding, which is why I do think the Youth Prize home ownership cohort is a great example, just of how you could creatively educate youth, but then also empower them to, you know, take up the space and make their voices heard, in which they would have stakes in the planning process as it relates to their own personal lived experiences, but then also from like the communities that they come from as well. And I feel that this is a great model for other organizations and institutions to follow and look at.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely these programs, Youth Prize, just being a part of this home ownership cohort, I've learned a lot more. Also, thank you, Lissa, for mentioning those legal covenant. What you said? The word you used?
Covenant.
Covenants.
Exactly. Mhm.
Those are legally owned houses saying, oh, you can't sell to these types of people, and they're just a part of the house. Like, so even having stuff like that around is an issue. I also believe, like, if we go back to earlier, just implementing some of these programs in schools, implementing some of these things in places of worship, having open dialogue, and making that stuff accessible. Like, yeah, that doesn't make sense that I am going to a financial advisor and I'm paying to do that, because clearly I'm here to talk to you about money. How am I supposed to pay for this? But I have been learning like a little bit through, like I said, I read a lot now about finances. And one thing with the richest man in Babylon, they'll say is you want to save at least 10%. So if I put that 10 up earlier, there's like save at least 10%. Most people might be like, how do I save 10% if I am living check to check? I agree. But this is not to push that grind mentality that, you know, America typically puts us through. But one thing with wealth building is to have multiple streams of income. That is something that you want to have going on. So if you realize when you're putting aside your 10% that you don't have enough to do this, then that's where you're like, bang, you know, I need to find another stream of income that can do that. And it doesn't have to be you working the job, because that's something else that's taking time away from you. And at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, the one thing that we care about is spending time with the people we love. And that's like the most important things. But in most cases, we get caught up working our whole life. Some people never retire or even get put in a position to retire. They're working check to check their entire life. So by the point where they even get too old to work, it's like you basically like, I don't want to cuss, but you're S word out of luck. You just in a bad place. So it's like kind of understanding these things while we're young and while we still do have that drive. Having things like passive income or finding ways to, have you a little hustle that is making you some more money to where you don't have to be there to collect that money. That's something that the wealthy do. They make money in their sleep. So that's something that we do have like a lot of resources as far as like the internet goes. We do live in the age of information. So we can take some of that responsibility for ourselves to a degree, but I agree that we should at least get some guidance, just to point us in the right direction, because without that, you don't really know where to turn to.
Exactly. Excellent. Excellent. In the last 4 minutes that we have, what's one thing you think young voices can do, young people like yourselves can do to impact change right now? In addition to taking this class, in addition to speaking on the panel, so it's not like you're not already doing it. Your list is long. But what would you offer to the community of here about things that young people can do in ways that young people can be supported in influencing change?
Can I just state the opinion that going to legislation and representatives, it's good work. I value it. I do it myself. I think it's very important. It is the long game, though. A lot of the wealth that occupies America is in corporations. We think it's in individuals, but in reality, it's in corporations. A lot of these corporations are tied to nonprofits that they own or foundations. Knocking on the door of those foundations and nonprofits or just the corporations themselves, I think is a good idea. If there was enough power, enough voices, enough momentum, there would be more power to extract some of that wealth. We have so many Fortune 500 companies here in Minnesota, Target being one of them just downtown, right? If there were enough young people that were like, hey, we see this problem, we see that this is going on. Let's use some of the resources that you guys are making from our communities to put back into the community. So I remember when the riots were happening during George Floyd, some of the money that Target had donated to the community went to good places, but it stopped, right? It didn't continue. And so if we put pressure on corporations, the trillionaires of the world, to really share the wealth that they're having instead of continuing to put money in the pockets at the round tables, I think that would be a practical solution opposed to in addition to playing the long game and going to legislation and asking for more money because they're printing it, right? It's coming out of thin air.
Excellent. 2 minutes, team.
Yeah, if I'm just gonna bounce off of that, I would agree. It's a collective effort. I feel like it's up to us to kind of like group together and to stop contributing to the issue. Because if we continue to do that, then it's just habitual and we're gonna just keep doing it and we're just stuck in a cycle. So like Emmett was saying, it will take changing policy, going to legislation, and just being different with our habits to where it's like, you can't keep doing this if we're not playing into it. Like, then it's like the world is going to change if nobody's participating in that. And I feel like once we start to speak out on these things and everybody has like some level of awareness and we can start to change our habits, I feel like that change can start to happen. It is a long game, but it has to start somewhere as a process.
Excellent. Thank you. Marcella or Summer, would you like to have the last word on this piece?
Yeah, just quickly, just to that. I mean, unfortunately, our money does speak louder than our words. Sometimes it's heard louder than our voices. So, if anything, like again, like you guys are saying, just kind of choosing where we spend our money because if they don't listen to us, they're gonna feel it in their pocket. So.
Summer, are you picking up what Marcella was laying down?
Yeah. I also, to piggyback off of everybody, I think it's very important for us to, find those adult allies that are actually willing to listen to youth and young people. So that way, for example, if we go to the Capitol, that we have those people in authority to advocate for us that are actually listening to us. And, as somebody that comes from a design background, you can't provide solutions without doing your research first, without understanding the problems at hand and you can't do that if you're not directly engaging with the communities that are impacted by them. So we need to be part of those conversations.
Now that's what I'm talking about. Summer, Marcella, Kadeem, and Emmett just laid it down. We will pick it back up in just a few minutes. I'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you so much. Excellent, excellent. Angela and Khalik and Benjamin, come on back, please, to share your thoughts before we go to the question and answer. People who are attending, please drop your questions or affirmations or love in the chat so that we can ask these young people to center their voices and help us learn. Benjamin, Khalik, Angela, welcome back. What are your thoughts based on the feedback from the last segment? Khalik, you're up, looks like.
Yeah, great topic, and all the insights and perspective that you all are adding are important. And I echo a lot of that based off of a lot of the government programs that exist or are coming up or are being created through legislation. It often doesn't make it to community. If you're not privy to those spaces, or for example, the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency has first-time homeowner programs that actually can help with a lot of the things that I'm hearing from you all, some of those insights. The issue is that government doesn't always meet community where they're at, so they can hear this information. Some of the work I've been doing here at Center for School Change, I've been able to create those community conversations and having Zooms such as this, for example, where they can explain these different programs that are existing and how the community can implement those. So that could be an avenue as well, just to create more of those conversations and a partnership opportunity. So they definitely need to hear more from community, and community can then share that and pollinate that information throughout their community as well. So it's just my thoughts.
I love it. Professor Mahmoud Al-Kadi, the Chair Emeritus of American History at Macalester College, says the town must meet the gown. So that's a good one, Khalik. Thank you. Angela, Benjamin. Benjamin, looks like you're up next. Welcome back.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, you all are on point. You've got a ton of great ideas. And just to acknowledge, it's hard to advance ideas, form coalitions. And I would just, support you and sort of enjoying the process, because I think burnout is one of the hard things that we all face over the long term. But if you can make it sort of part of your social life, sort of part of your interests, build it into your life so that it's not just a burden. Advocacy can be pretty rad. I mean, I was part of many campaigns as a youth, made tons of friends, networks, and even eventually, sometimes it leads to jobs. So I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. You got tons of ideas. I hope you can advocate for them through all those channels you mentioned, to government, to corporations, foundations. But yeah, it's awesome to hear.
Thank you. In Work for Change, rest is resistance. So remember that. Rest and self-care are resistance. Angela, you're vibing.
Yes, that's a good place for me to start. So I was struggling a little bit with Kadeem when you were talking about you named it about the grind, and there's tension in that. There really is. I even see it with my kids who does hair on the side as her side hustle, and the other one has a t-shirt clothing business as his side hustle. Young people 18 to 21. And now I'm working with them, talking with them to balance out being able to do that for the reasons that they've chosen, along with their just general creativity and being present with doing other things in their lives. So I think it's a constant tension that young adults should really think about. And then, and that was a personal one, so I started there. You guys said so much. It was just wonderful to hear. So I just want to touch on a few things. So, Emmett, you talked about cash. She just put it out there. Boom, cash. That is the answer. And certainly we're seeing some programs across the country, including one close to home to you all, across the river, St. Paul. I'm in Maryland, so I'm trying to, across the way with Rondo and the city of St. Paul and their inheritance fund, working with the Rondo Community Land Trust and city to really help descendants who are displaced because of the highway that came through the neighborhood. So you, in your backyard or side yard, you all have a model to really look into and get to know and see how it's working. And then in other communities, have something, you know, similar to that. They may call them guaranteed income programs, or just a variety of names, but that's one close to home. And another one I'll mention in the city of Austin, there's an entity called Up Together, and they're doing that, providing cash for people to make their own decisions on how they use them. And people have used them to purchase housing and do other things to really stabilize where they are. So it's definitely out there. You know, how it plays out policy wise, we have yet to see. These are really nascent programs that are coming up across the country. So keep your eyes out for that. And back to a lot of what I heard around legislation and advocacy, you know, paying attention to how other programs are kicking off in other communities may give some insight on how you all can potentially galvanize around whether it could be doable in your own community and bring it forth as legislation in which you may advocate for. So, so those two things, and then I'll just touch on one other one that stood out for me. So there was conversation around, I think it was Kademi talked about or mentioned around gentrification and displacement, all of those pieces, and all of which is very true. And what it brought me to really think about as a person who grew up in the north end of Hartford, wouldn't say that I, you know, were middle class or, and then I went to high school very much like Marcella that you described, had a very different awareness. And as I continued to get older and really think about community and changes in community, that whole thing around gentrification came up. And I would say for you all to think more about mitigating displacement versus trying to ward off gentrification. And I say that because with gentrification, you know, the plus side of it is it brings resources and, you know, amenities to community. What we want to be able to focus on is that it doesn't displace people that are already in these communities. So I encourage you all to think about it from that perspective. There are several entities out there. Smart Growth America comes to mind of one that really tries to have us think about displacement versus gentrification, or, you know, the flip or the two sides of the coins, if you will, on that. And so being able to advocate for really good services and amenity for improved quality of life is super important, while keeping community in mind so that they're not displaced, they don't lose their housing and those kinds of things. So I'll stop there. There's so much other great stuff that you all said. Super wonderful that you are thinking about all this wonderful stuff. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Angela. We're now going to open up the floor to question and answer. There have not yet been any questions, but I think there've been lots of feedback about your excellence, by the way. You should know that. So all the love is coming up. But there might be because the fact that you're putting on people's heads, people are really getting clearer on what's happening. Let's talk about a couple of things. One, the role of culture in how barriers show up, language and culture. You know, in all the ways that culture shows up. I think about James Baldwin. If you've ever been poor, you know how extremely expensive it is, that everything that we do in this country is on the backs of the people that we call poor. And so, Marcella, Summer, you've been vibing with the idea of culture and language difference and immigration and all of those kinds of things. How does that impact racial literacy wealth gap? And how does it impact the racial literacy gap? And how does it impact homeownership and barriers to it?
I think the most obvious would be language, you know, being able to have this information available to everyone. And I know at least from like my, I guess, experience, there are good programs for like the Latinx community that give a lot of these resources and information. Again, it's not, you know, accessible and available to everyone. So there's that. But then again, I'd say language is the biggest one. And then even just starting from completely from scratch, you know, not knowing anything about this country, not knowing how the government works, not knowing how taxes work, not knowing, you know, we still do our taxes, not knowing how the school system works or anything like that. So I think that's like a really big thing, especially when it comes to home ownership again, because that is, you know, kind of the topic of discussion and is really important. That's like a big thing. It's just, how do you even save enough money when you're not making enough money to send your kids to school, to buy food, to put clothes on their backs, to pay for gas, you know, and then on top of that, to save your money in a way. And then where do you invest it? Because that's another thing, you know, you don't know where to invest it. Like I still don't know really about investing. So I think those are like the biggest things I can think of for that.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Marcella. Summer, I can see you thinking hard.
Yeah. I will also agree with Marcella. I definitely think language is a very, very big barrier. Even just thinking as how it limits your opportunities to education. You can't learn anything if you don't speak the language that things are being taught in which then that limits your access to certain opportunities as well, you know, in a country where it's always higher ed this, higher ed that. And even just thinking of my grandpa that doesn't speak English very well, I was actually very sad to hear that he retired maybe, I think it was last year or a couple of years ago. And I learned that his ending salary was $16 an hour. So yeah, I mean that's a literal lived experience. It's yeah, so language for sure like really limits your access to things. Sorry.
Yeah. And even if you can't get the resources, it's like the resources aren't coming to you. If you have any questions, like where do you go? Where does one who is new to a country go to get information? My grandpa is in his 70s and he's working construction, you know, on top of a roof, and he has surgery on both of his knees. So it's just, yeah, it is really hard to see your loved ones have to go through that. And I know I'm getting like off topic now, but it is hard because as the only one in my family with papers, like I know I have to take on their responsibilities, and they don't get to retire. They have the money taken out of their taxes, out of their paychecks for that, but they're never going to see any of it back. And I have two older sisters and my parents and my grandparents, and ultimately they don't have to say it, but I know that that's on me to take care of them when they're older. And that's a different thing. You know, it's like, it doesn't matter about what I want to do. It's about what I have to do to be able to afford to take care of them when they're older.
I want to thank you both for your bravery. And you're very much on topic, because the questions we don't ask about are how does it feel and what happens? If you can't amass wealth, you can't transfer wealth. And if I'm working when I'm 70 and my wage is $16 an hour, my retirement would be nothing. We cannot continue to live in a country that has this kind of wealth and continue to do that. Emmett, you said, show me the money. That's the answer. Cash is king. Show me the money.
Yeah, and just to echo some of the things that Angela had said, I believe that that's like so prevalent. I know personally, I didn't receive any stimulus checks, but everyone else in the world seems like they did. For a number of reasons, um, I don't believe in taxes, right? So I've never filed, and I don't make enough to really be on their radar. And I'm open and radical about saying and sharing that, because I think that it's really important for us to take this veil off, this illusion that our taxes are actually funding our government. It's not funding the schools or the roads or the infrastructure. All of our money is that we are paying into taxes it's a facade, right? And so I say that candidly because I want other people to take on that belief, because it's the truth. When we look at what's going on in the world and where our tax dollars are truly going, it's to bombard innocent civilians. And so I think that when it comes to like stimulus checks or direct cash transfers, those things are powerful because they do really truly make a difference in community. And I just wanted to thank you, Angela, for bringing up that point about direct cash transfers and the inheritance fund, because those are programs that are siloed that unless you're in the known, you're not going to know. So I appreciate both of you guys' insight as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Before we turn to final reactions, Kadeem, what would you like to say to wrap up this segment?
Yeah, yeah, it is a lot, definitely. Like I was saying earlier about getting older and not being able to retire. Like you see it throughout your family. You see people get old, you see them get sick. And I don't come from a background of wealth at all. I was born in Columbus, Ohio. My parents moved here just to get away from that. Um, 6 siblings in the house. I remember my mom was 40, still making minimum wage. I remember at a certain point I was making more than her. And just seeing that and being around that, um, it definitely does something to your psyche. You definitely do kind of get into a point where you do feel like it's your responsibility, whether it's said or not, because it's like they did their best to raise you, to put you in position to, succeed. So it's like where it may not be your responsibility or shouldn't be, you kind of feel like it is. So it's like, how do you escape that or get away from that when you feel like that? And of course, you're grateful, and of course, you're going to want to give back. So of course, you're going to do your best to try to, you know, be a part of that. But I definitely do feel like it does start with us somewhere, and it's just something that just needs to be figured out. And I think it's going to be a process. And as long as we're having dialogue and conversations like this, I feel like we're contributing to a solution day by day. So I would just say, like, keep doing stuff like this, keep it up. If anybody does need a resource, I'll continue to keep educating myself in financial literacy, and I'll always do what I can to share what I learned with anybody. Like, it's not, this should be free information, because at the end of the day, if we all got money, the more we have, especially if we come from a background of poverty, we understand what it's like to need. I will hope that we are also very giving people as well. And like I said, if you keeping the money in the community, like, it doesn't hurt to break bread with the people around you. So if we're bringing that money in and we're learning these things together, I feel like there's no way we can lose. So that's just my input.
Excellent. Khalik, you have the last word. I saw you took your microphone off, so you've got the last word in this segment. Thank you, Kadeem.
Yeah, just wanted to thank you all for your time and your insights. This is more than inspiring. We got the next generation of change makers up here, right? With that being said, it's just to echo what you're all are saying, is that there is a need for more collective action. Let's not let these, discussions and these testimonials that are real, that are relevant, that are happening now be wasted when we can collectively come together to do something about the issues we're facing. So I'm excited to hear and learn more about the follow-up for this conversation, and how I'm more than happy and excited to help support. So looking forward to supporting you all on this journey.
My thanks to you, Angela, Benjamin, and Khalik. Thank you for being here. On behalf of Youth Prize, thank you for being our guests. We appreciate you, and we appreciate you sharing your insights. Thank you so much, team. Thank you. Take care. Thank you very much. And now it is time for our youth panelists, our stars, to leave a last thought with our audience. If there's one thing that you want to leave with them, if that's the only thing that they remember, what would it be?
No pressure.
No, please record it for posterity, and I'm going to put this on Insta. Just kidding.
I guess, oh, sorry. I would just say, just quickly, I don't know, I don't know what the last thing I would want to be is, but I think it's important to just talk about it and be open to hearing other people talk about it, and then not being afraid to use your voice and help in any capacity that you can, because honestly, at this point, it's like anything you can do will help. And obviously, the more people that are informed about it, the better. It's just about, our numbers and having a strong voice and having a strong presence, and letting people know that this is important, and we're not going away. We're not going to be quiet. We're not just going to take what is given to us and be happy with it, because it's not enough.
I'll add that the more you give, the more you receive, right? And that's not something from me. That's from scripture. It's so important to realize that Like greed is prevalent, it's rampant, and it's in all of us in some capacity. And so if we're able to really truly do a check with ourselves every day and figure out what our one drop in the ocean can look like and what tsunami can be created because of that drop, that would be doing the most, right? Because most people aren't doing that. They're not doing the internal reflection. I remember a teacher in my senior year of high school. I was homeless at the time. She took me shopping to Macy's, got me a suit and the tie, the whole thing from socks to drawers, right? And she made sure that I was good. And she came out of her own pocket. There was no fund for that. And to just go above and beyond is what I want to leave folks with, because it starts with you, right? And it starts with being able to be vulnerable enough to just share your wealth. And even if you're not wealthy, like God will make sure, you have what you need.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I'm gonna keep mine short and simple. But I think ask questions and don't assume. I think it's a good starting point to just have conversations. I feel that, and maybe this has changed over the pandemic, but I feel a lot of people enjoy talking and sometimes there's not enough room for listening. So ask questions.
And with the final word, I would say, just to touch on what Angela was saying earlier about promoting that that relaxation or promoting that self-care. That's really important. I remember when I graduated high school, I felt the responsibility to be an adult because I was 18. So I went directly into school. I was doing architectural school full time, and I was working 2 jobs at the time. And I learned fast that burnout is a thing, and you cannot operate at full capacity. You are like, to a degree, like a computer. Of course, we got emotions, but if you got so many tasks open and all these windows open, you cannot operate at full capacity. You're gonna lag. So definitely make sure you're taking care of yourself, and have that balance, that work balance life. Spend time with the people you love, because when it's all said and done, like I said, and that's not to be dark or anything, you're gonna remember the time that you spent with the people you love. You're gonna remember the time that you went outside and you felt yourself at complete peace,
Yes.
and all those different times. So that's all I gotta say.
Thank you. The wisdom. We couldn't pay for it if we wanted to because it's just so deep and good and rich, but we will take it home and we will spread it liberally. Blessings to Youth Prize for putting these things together that matter, for ways that people can do something about the problems that we all share. My best to my friend Lynn Matthews, who I now turn it over to close this amazing program. Summer, Marcella, Emmett, and Kadeem. Straight hearts, mad respect, much love. Thank you, and thank you, Youth Prize.
Thank you, Lissa. This was just awesome. Very insightful discussion. Appreciate the honesty and the vulnerability of the young people. I tell you, the young people, you all never disappoint. So thank you so much for sharing and just being so honest and so vulnerable. All of our panelists, our adult panelists, thank you as well. Attendees, thank you for taking the time out today to spend with us. Just 3 quick notes. There's in the chat where we have a link to our post-event survey. We really want to hear what you think about the event and ways that we may be able to improve. So please take a few minutes to complete that and help us to plan and improve future events. Our next Disrupting with Purpose is going to be on June the 4th. We're going to be talking about healing. We came up with this topic in light of just current events and things that we see happening, not just in Minnesota, but in the world, but specifically just rollbacks as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then in Minnesota, yesterday's legislative decision on the use of prone restraints in schools, and how is all of this impacting the health and well-being and sense of safety for our young people. So we'll be focusing on that on June the 4th. And then also we'd love to hear, a lot of you have already shared in the chat, but we'd love to hear what stuck with you today as attendees. So please just take a few moments before you log off to drop in the chat what our young people said that really stuck with you. So with that, I will bring this to a close. Thank everyone for coming out today, and we look forward to seeing you all on June the 4th. Take care now.